Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's explainer briefing, which is going to serve as the theoretical foundation for our laboratory practical session. I'm really delighted to guide you through Memory Experiment 3 today. Now, as postgraduate psychology students, your objective here goes way beyond just, administering a memory task and writing down some scores. Our core aim is to deeply understand how factual knowledge, concepts, meanings, and category relationships are actually organized, stored, and efficiently retrieved from long-term memory. We are literally looking at the architecture of the human mind here, the underlying structural frameworks that allow us to process reality, communicate through language, and engage in some really complex reasoning. So let's dive right into the cognitive architecture of human memory.
Just to keep us perfectly on track, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with an introduction to semantic memory, move into spreading activation, outline our lab methodology, look at expected results, explore some clinical applications, and then finally wrap up with your viva voce questions.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, an introduction to semantic memory, which really establishes the whole framework for what we're doing today.
I want you to think critically for a second about the difference between simply knowing a fact and actually remembering an event. Semantic memory is a major subsystem of explicit long-term memory, but unlike episodic memory, which stores your very specific, context-dependent personal experiences, semantic memory is our organized, totally context-free store of general knowledge. It's where we keep facts, vocabulary, rules, symbols, the whole shebang. In cognitive psychology, we observe this fascinating process called semanticization. Basically, over time, memories often lose all those episodic, context-dependent details, and they transition into generalized semantic knowledge. For example, you know that water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, right? But you probably don't remember the exact time, the place, or the specific moment you first learned that fact. And detaching facts from their original context is actually highly adaptive. It saves us an immense amount of cognitive load and storage space. This incredible efficiency is what enables rapid language comprehension, object recognition, and reasoning, all without the heavy cognitive burden of recalling the original learning event.
Okay, moving on to Section 2. How exactly is this vast mental encyclopedia structured? Let's look at the cognitive architecture, specifically spreading activation and networks. Notice the interconnected networks we're looking at here. Semantic knowledge is absolutely not stored in isolated silos. It exists in a highly complex, associative conceptual network. Biologically and functionally, these act as nodes and links. When you activate one conceptual node, let's say tiger, neural pathways facilitate the automatic activation of related conceptual nodes like animal, stripes, or jungle. And what that does is lower their threshold for retrieval. This phenomenon is what we call spreading activation. It elegantly explains why semantically related information is recalled so much faster than unrelated data. The associative strength between these nodes dictates the speed of memory recall. It's a mechanism that is fundamentally critical to our intelligent behavior and our ability to make split-second decisions. With that theoretical foundation firmly in place, let's shift to Section 3, the exact mechanics of our laboratory experiment methodology. So you're ready for data collection. The aim of our experiment today is to study semantic memory by examining the recall and recognition of meaningful conceptual information. Now, when we say meaningful conceptual information, we're talking about stimuli that share hierarchical category membership. So, for example, grouping items strictly as fruits or vehicles, rather than just presenting random, unconnected phonological strings. The driving psychological principle we're testing here is straightforward but honestly profound. Information that is organized according to inherent meaning and conceptual relationships is encoded much more efficiently and retrieved far more accurately than isolated, completely unrelated information. As postgraduate psychology students, I need you to carefully examine the variables established in this table. Strict experimental control is the absolute hallmark of valid cognitive research. Our independent variable is the semantic relationship among the presented stimuli, meaning whether the items actually belong to the same overarching category or not. Our dependent variable is the measurable outcome, which is the number of correctly recalled or recognized items. Now look closely at the controlled variables. Novice researchers often fail to strictly control presentation time and the recall interval. We absolutely must control these to prevent confounds, like working memory rehearsal, which could artificially mask or inflate true long-term semantic retrieval. We have to be precise here. So here is your actual procedural methodology. First, you'll seat your participant comfortably and explain the task clearly. This establishes a standard baseline. Next, you're going to present a series of words or picture cards belonging to different semantic categories, and you must allow sufficient and uniform time for observation. After the presentation and the strictly timed recall interval, you'll administer the task. It's vital you understand the cognitive differences at play here. A recall task demands high cognitive effort because the participant has to freely generate the target from memory. A recognition task, on the other hand, merely requires them to match a presented stimulus to a stored representation. Finally, accurately record their responses on your scoring sheets so we can calculate the data for our laboratory analysis.
Before we look at the anticipated data, I want to pose a question for you to really reflect upon during the experiment today. Why exactly is semantically related information remembered so much better than unrelated information? Just keep the concepts of cognitive load and interconnected networks in the back of your mind as you're conducting your trials.
Let's transition now into the empirical data segment of our briefing, Section 4, Expected Observations and Results. Based on decades of robust cognitive psychology research, this chart illustrates the exact observations we expect to see. Notice how conceptual organization dramatically influences retrieval. You are going to find that participants recall semantically related items significantly more accurately than unrelated items. The bar on the left represents categorized information. This leverages pre-existing semantic schemas to basically bypass cognitive bottlenecks. But the bar on the right, that represents unrelated, isolated facts. Processing those forces the participant to rely heavily on limited working memory capacity and brute force episodic tagging. It requires vastly more cognitive effort to encode and retrieve. So, the crucial takeaway we interpret from these findings is that semantic organization fundamentally strengthens memory performance. When subjects process meaningful relationships among concepts, they are forging much stronger, deeply embedded memory representations. This internal organization drastically reduces the overall retrieval effort and powerfully supports long-term knowledge acquisition. We don't just memorize things, you see. We actually build structures of meaning.
But a laboratory experiment is only as valuable as its real-world application, right? So how do these findings regarding spreading activation and conceptual networks apply to practical, cognitive, and clinical settings outside these walls? Let's explore why this actually matters. Which brings us nicely to Section 5, Cognitive and Clinical Applications. Let's see how this semantic architecture informs real-world practices. In educational psychology, these findings are incredibly powerful. Educators actively utilize semantic organization to foster long-term retention. By grouping related concepts rather than just relying on rote, isolated memorization, we can accelerate vocabulary acquisition and deeply support complex reading comprehension. This is literally the exact scientific basis for techniques like concept mapping in classroom teaching. A concept map isn't just a handy study aid. It conceptually mirrors the biological node and link architecture of the human cortex, which minimizes the metabolic cost of learning new information. It's fascinating stuff. And the clinical utility of what you're studying today is equally profound. Semantic memory assessments are an absolute cornerstone of neuropsychological evaluation. Consider conditions like the semantic variant of primary progressive aphasia or specific subtypes of frontotemporal dementia. In these neurodegenerative diseases, profound semantic degradation can actually precede significant episodic memory loss. A patient might clearly remember the episodic event of, say, attending a wedding, but entirely lose the semantic concept of what a wedding actually is. Understanding baseline semantic performance is therefore absolutely crucial for early diagnosis and for structuring targeted, effective cognitive rehabilitation programs. All right, we have arrived at Section 6, our conclusion and Viva questions, after which we'll get straight to the practical. If you take one overarching principle away from today's session, let it be this. The semantic memory experiment demonstrates unequivocally that human memory is organized around meaning, rather than isolated facts. Understanding semantic organization is fundamental, absolutely fundamental, to understanding human cognition, language, reasoning, and intelligent behavior as a whole. On the screen here are your 5 Viva Voce questions. As you head to your stations to conduct the practical, I expect you to independently synthesize your observations and prepare to articulate precise academic answers to these. Consider how every single wordless you present is actually probing the very architecture of your participant's mind. And before you begin, I want you to ask yourselves this final question. If our entire reality, our language, and our intelligence rely entirely on these delicate, invisible webs of meaning, what happens to a person's core identity when those semantic networks begin to unravel? Keep that in mind. Good luck with your data collection today.